much. I feel really honored to be here amongst this group of esteemed leaders, and thank you for the opportunity. And I'm so appreciative of Kelly and Arlene for gathering us today. On Tuesday, a jury convicted a murderer who had killed George Floyd in broad daylight and on camera. And yet, to paraphrase Van Jones, despite all the evidence, we woke up that day afraid to hope. This is justice, only in its most basic form. It is a tiny drop for a community literally dying of thirst. And the fact that we are inclined to attach a great significance, a celebration, a sigh of relief to this historic conviction is a symptom of a disease, of the delusion of white supremacy with which we've all been infected. We were not an hour into discussing the verdict before we heard about 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant murdered in Columbus, Ohio, and the next morning Andrew Brown Jr. in North Carolina, all on the heels of Adam Toledo and Daunte Wright, whose death was the impetus for this gathering just a week before. And so here we are again standing up for Black lives, again begging and pleading for Black lives to matter, and asking again, as we do every day, what has to happen to effect systemic change and real justice? What can we as white people do to stop the hemorrhaging of Black bodies who die at rates 2 to 4 times that of whites in ways from police to COVID to childbirth to heart disease and pretty much every way a human can die? And make no mistake, white people invented whiteness, we invented supremacy, and it is our imperative to fix it. In knowing that systemic white supremacy is so baked into this country's institutions that individual bigots are not even necessary to further oppression, and in also knowing that we must have anti-racist people who will work effortlessly in order to dismantle those systems, I keep coming back to the work of heart changing. The work to dissolve delusions of supremacy and to abolish systems of supremacy rests in the practice of changing hearts, starting with our own. The work of heart changing must be a mindful and intentional daily practice. It must be one that starts from within and spreads throughout our families, throughout our friends, throughout our school districts, throughout our communities, and beyond. We must cross the bridge from activism as a hobby to true cross-racial solidarity by making our work a lifestyle. And how do we do this? How do we grow from activism as a hobby to abolition as a lifestyle? I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I have a few ideas I'd like to add to what has been said here today. It starts with truth and accountability. Self-introspection and education go hand in hand as a daily practice. We have to spend real intentional time contemplating our own internal racial biases. We have to recognize, confront, and challenge them. We need to spend real intentional time recognizing the ways in which our grandparents and our parents and ourselves and our children have benefited from systems of white supremacy. We need to sit internally with those uncomfortable truths, and we also need to verbalize them to others in order to be accountable. Alongside of those introspections, we have to educate ourselves, because without the historical framework of the systems of white supremacy, we may not even have the context to ask ourselves the important questions and to ask those questions of our communities. There have been so many voices and lessons that have served to dramatically shift my perspective from one that centers whiteness and the white body standard to one that serves to center Blackness and bodies of culture. I've barely scratched the surface, and yet my list of impactful lessons was so long that it made this speech way too long. So I'm just going to say, don't get bogged down in reading all the books. There's too many of them, and it will keep you from the work. So instead, look for interviews with and speeches or essays by the authors to save time to get the foundations. You can do that. And if you need a list of where to begin, hit me up on Facebook because it's a lot. The self-reflection and education will likely change you, and you will find yourself craving Black voices, so go get some. Decenter whiteness in your media consumption by following more and more Black voices. Make relationships with real-life Black people with whom you have authentic conversations about race. Do this and you will further dissolve the delusion of white supremacy. These new connections will serve to illuminate the ways in which we have been misinformed, indoctrinated, and brainwashed on the nature of race, and the ways in which we have been deprived of Black brilliance and Black beauty. These new connections will fill your heart with love for all humanity, and that love will fuel your fire for justice and true equity. And please, share your introspections and your education with your white circles, but most importantly, your children. Practice speaking out and standing up, most importantly, in front of your children. We must raise children who embrace anti-racism as a lifestyle. Because as Amanda Gorman said, being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's about the past we step into and how we repair it. Black lives matter. Thank you for giving me this time.